So really, really nice to see you all. So my name's Suryanaga. So today I'll be continuing in our series that we started last week. Kasha Mitra kicked us off last week, talking about introducing this series, Who is the Buddha? So it's a series of lectures that Sangharakshita, the founder of our Buddhist order, gave quite early on, actually, in just after founding our Buddhist order in the late 60s, and he kind of gave this series of lectures to start to kind of teach this very new Buddhist movement in the West at that point about kind of the significance of who the Buddha is, as Pranyamanas was saying in the first half, the whole series explores different aspects of the Buddha, or different aspects of the Buddha's teachings, or in a way different kind of reasons why the Buddha is so significant, especially to Buddhists. And the chapter title that is or lecture title that has fallen to me to talk about is the word of the Buddha. And so I'll be talking about that, but I'm going to start with a bit of a story, or sort of continuing the story of what happened after the Buddha became enlightened. So the Buddha attained enlightenment, so he had this kind of realization that freed him from the sort of kind of suffering that we all know is just imbued into life, the kind of unsatisfactoriness of life. It completely, he had this realization, sat deep in meditation under a tree after kind of questing for many, many years. And he had this realization that we're not separate. There's kind of many facets, in a way, many ways to talk about what his realization was, but maybe that's just one that I'll kind of drop in. If you don't know what enlightenment is at all, that's probably one of the first things I would say, is that he had this realization that we're not really as separate as we think we are, and the fact that we sort of think that we are and behave like we are causes us, kind of is the root cause of the suffering that is the common thread throughout all of our life. So he had this realization, and he had this realization that, actually I could, now that I've really seen through that, now that I've really, really seen through it, not just as an idea, but sort of on a sort of subterranean level, he's seen through that delusion, he could just stop. He could just stop relating to his experience like that. He could just let go of any kind of wanting or craving experience to be different to how it is, and he could just be. And that's something that's way, way easier, obviously, to say than it is to do. But he was doing it somehow, But what I'm going to focus in on is what happened next. So pretty much, well, let's say for now that what happened next is that he thought to himself, this is, I've done it. I've achieved what I've kind of set out to do in terms of freed myself from suffering. I've freed myself from the kind of the prison of life and death, the cycle of death and rebirth. So I should probably go and tell people about this. Right? He had this kind of thought. But as part of that, he also thought, but nobody's going to get it. Nobody's going to get this, because this is so subtle and hard to understand that I won't be able to explain it to anybody. If I try to explain it, they're just not going to get it. So probably be better if I just sat here and enjoyed it. He's completely free from suffering, so he's just dwelling in a sort of bliss that we can barely imagine, really. So that's what he thought. And then what happens next is that a figure sort of appears to him, actually a sort of a god appears to him called Brahma Sahampati. It's okay to laugh at that name. Brahma Sahampati was a sort of god of worlds. Probably don't need to go too much into who Brahma Sahampati was. But the significance of him appearing is that he says to the Buddha, he basically kind of begs him to teach. He really, really kind of, and this is significant in itself, is that what the Buddha has attained means that even kind of gods are sort of kind of deferring to him. They're not just going to tell him what to do. They're going to, if they want him to do something, they're really going to be asking him very nicely. So Brahma Sahampati comes along and he says, there are some but with little dust in their eyes. That's what he says. So there are some but with little dust on their eyes. And in response to that, the Buddha has this vision of lotuses. So he sort of sees all beings as lotuses, and we've got this image of lotuses behind me and on the other side of the shrine there, and we don't really have lotuses in this country, or I think it's very, very hard to grow them, but lotuses grow out of the mud, and they're quite amazing when they do this, because they grow out of the mud, and when they blossom, I guess because of the way that flowers are all unblossomed. When they blossom, they're completely kind of pristine of mud. They blossom and they're completely beautiful. And so he saw that there's this kind of infinite kind of vision of lotuses, all different kind of sizes and shapes and colours, and importantly different points of blossoming. So some were kind of under the mud, completely buried in the mud. Some were kind of halfway up, and some of them were kind of ready to start blossoming. And he realised with that vision, there is. I can go and teach. It is going to be kind of worth doing, basically, because there are some who are kind of ready to hear the teachings. Some people are going to be receptive enough to hear the teachings. So after this, he thinks about who he's going to tell. And eventually what happens is he goes and finds his friends, these 5 friends who, if you know the first part of the story, are his friends who he was practicing with, but had basically kind of disowned him because he had stopped kind of practicing ascetic practices, like starving yourself, basically. He'd stopped doing that and realised that there was kind of a bit more nuance to how we need to practice than that. And so he goes and finds these 5 friends because he wants to share it with them. That's significant in itself as well, that he thought actually I want to go and share this with my friends. It's kind of like that in life, isn't it? If you have any significant experience, you want to go and tell your friends about it. The Buddha's had the most significant experience that anyone could possibly have, so of course he wants to go and tell his friends. And even though these friends have kind of disowned him, he comes along. And initially they're continuing to be not listening to him. They see him approaching and they go, okay, right, he's here he comes, Prince Siddhartha, who goes off and kind of eats when we're all kind of practicing these starving ourselves practices. And so they say, let's not let him sit with us. Basically, it's a bit kind of Mean Girls this moment. About a quarter of you got that reference. But as he's approaching, they change their mind. Something about just his presence means that they completely change their mind, and they start offering him a seat, offering him the best seat near the fire or whatever it is. And they say to him, "What's happened to you?" He tells them, okay, well, actually, I've become enlightened, and then over the course of quite a bit of conversation, it seems like he manages to explain it to them. And then, in a way, the next most important thing after the Enlightenment happens, which is that someone else becomes enlightened. Yeah, so the Buddha is already enlightened. He's the enlightened. He's the first person, at least in our kind of Buddha age, to discover this truth for himself. And initially he thinks this can't be communicated, but then he does. He manages to communicate it to one of his friends. And in the text, he's so kind of happy about that. He's exclaiming that his friend gets it. Kandanya is called. He just exclaims like, Kandanya knows. And then he manages to explain it to his other friends, and then there are a whole bunch of other enlightened beings in the world. And the rest of the Buddha's life, so the Buddha attained enlightenment around, I think it's 29 years old. The rest of the Buddha's life, up until his 80s when he dies, is pretty much doing a sort of similar thing, basically. He's going around tirelessly communicating the enlightenment experience to people. And that's why we're talking about the word of the Buddha today, because if it wasn't for the Buddha speaking, if it wasn't for the Buddha kind of realizing that he can actually communicate the enlightened experience and then being able to actually do it, well, we wouldn't be sat here today. Obviously, we wouldn't have Buddhism. We wouldn't have access to the enlightened experience ourselves. Which we all do. So it's really, really significant, this idea of that the Buddha taught. The Buddha didn't just sit there and dwell in his blissful enlightened experience. There was a compassionate sort of aspect to the enlightened experience. And you could say that this kind of vision of Brahma Sahampati was part of the enlightened experience. It wasn't actually kind of separate to his seeing through the real truth of things. It was actually kind of part of it on one level, that he saw, and I need to communicate this. Yeah, so it's all part of the same experience. So I'm going to talk a bit about what he taught for a little bit, and then we'll get on to going into a bit more of I guess, the significance of this communication aspect of the Buddha. So I've talked about the rest of his life is communicating the teachings, and he did this in all different ways. He responded to whoever he came in contact with, and spoke in their language. Akash and Mitra were speaking a bit about this last week. So all of the kind of the wealth of Buddhist texts. There's no kind of Buddhist Bible, for example. There's no one book that is the things that the Buddha said and did, but there's a whole wealth of Buddhist literature of all of these different stories of what the Buddha did. But I think my favourite kind of formulation of the Buddha's teaching is what he came up with right at the end of his life. So right before he died, he started going around. He did a bit of a sort of final farewell tour. I think he had a bit of a notion that he was going to die soon. I guess partly just because he was getting very old. And he started going around with this one very kind of pithy formulation of the teachings, which is called the Threefold Path. Does anyone know what the Threefold Path is? Can anybody recount that? There's three of them. Go on, Pete.
Is it ethics, meditation, and wisdom?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, ethics, meditation, and wisdom. So this is kind of my favourite formulation in the Buddhist teachings because it's the most simple in a way, and seems to capture the most of Buddhism of any kind of formulation that I've seen, certainly in 3 words. So ethics, meditation, and wisdom. There's actually, I'm going to write on the board on the flip chart the original words for these. So this is what the Buddha was going around kind of just saying again and again to people before he died. He talked about sila, which is ethics. He talked about samadhi, which is meditation, or meditation proper, you could say. And then he talked about prajna. That's an A and then a J, separate. So yeah, ethics, meditation, wisdom. And so yeah, we've got all of the kind of Buddhist path in there. We've got ethics, which isn't Christian morality. It's not just a set of rules of things that you should and shouldn't do. It's a set of principles that if you act in certain ways, if you act in positive, skillful ways towards yourself and other people, then that will result in more positive mental states. And that's really, really related to samadhi in a sort of causal sort of fashion, in a sort of enabling fashion, you could say, because when we do that, when we act in more and more positive ways, and we get more kind of clear, positive mental states, that enables us to practice meditation more easily and more deeply. Yeah, so ethics, practicing ethics is a condition that enables practicing meditation. Yeah. In the same way, meditation is a condition that supports the practice of wisdom, the practice of cultivating wisdom. And so when we say wisdom here, we're talking about seeing through how reality really works. So seeing beyond this kind of idea that we're a fixed and separate self that exists, somehow kind of outside of all of the things that make us up, including all of the people that we interact with, and that we can just kind of go about our lives as if we're the centre of the universe. All of us, to some extent, even though we might not like to admit it, do act like we're the centre of the universe. Yeah, I do, you do, like we all do to some extent, and that's because of this kind of core delusion. And prajna, or wisdom, is the quality, the faculty that is enabling us to see through that. And meditation's an enabling factor for that. So some of you will be really, really familiar with that as a progressive model that's explaining kind of, in a way, all of Buddhism in a really, really simple way. But what I want to talk about next, or jump off on, is that the Buddha's experience wasn't just kind of going step 1, step 2, step 3, I've done it. I've now seen through reality. Because if that was the case, then we would probably, if we think that, we'll fall into the trap of thinking, okay, where am I on these steps? You know, like, am I on step 1 where I'm just trying to be a better person, or am I in step 2 when I'm trying to learn how to meditate? And when I finish learning how to meditate, will I then get on to step 3 where I start to see through reality? You could start to see it like that, especially as you start practicing. But the really important thing about this kind of progression is that once you've got some experience of prajna, once you've got some experience of wisdom, what you're then going to do is come back round. You're going to come back round, and you're going to keep going round in this sort of spiral motion. Yeah. So you practice each one of these 3 aspects of the Threefold Path at higher and higher levels. And that's important when thinking about the Buddha, because the Buddha would have sort of had these down at the highest possible level. So particularly prajna, he would just be imbued with prajna. It wouldn't even be sort of like a way of thinking in a way. It would just be like he's seen through reality. So he's communicating from prajna. Yeah. Good. Okay, I'll just pause there for a second. Has anyone got any questions about that so far?
I have one.
Yep.
Can you tell me, is there like an ethical framework? A pre-existing ethical framework which you're supposed to follow?
Yeah. We've already chanted it tonight.
Oh yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah. There are we call them precepts. So kind of like principles in a way. So we chanted the 5 precepts earlier tonight. Abstaining from harm and moving towards loving kindness is the first one. I'm not going to list them all out actually.
No, I remember.
Yeah, good.
Okay,
Yeah.
So that is the framework.
Yeah. Those are they're also called training principles.
Yeah.
Because in a way that just underlines again that they're not rules. It's kind of like you can't legislate for wisdom or something. You can't kind of have you can't legislate for every single possible scenario. Yeah. Did you have
how do those 5 precepts relate to the 4 Buddhist virtues?
4 Buddhist virtues? Which of those?
Yeah, so I'm reading about, they call them the 4 immeasurables.
4 immeasurable.
Brahma.
Oh, the Brahma Viharas.
Yeah.
How do they relate to them? Well, they enable them. So the 4 Brahma Viharas, or the 4 immeasurables, are metta, loving kindness, compassion, which is kind of loving kindness when you see somebody who's suffering in a way that it's metta's response to suffering. Mudita, which is sympathetic joy, or metta's response to someone else being happy. and then equanimity. So having kind of an equal response of love towards anybody, even people that you don't know. The relationship between the ethical precepts and the Brahma Viharas are basically that we're trying to get to the Brahma Viharas. The Brahma Viharas are in a way different. Those would be responses that an enlightened mind would naturally have to different people in different states. And the training principles, the precepts, if we do those more and more, we'll start to have those responses more and more naturally without having to make the effort to do them. So we can cultivate them in meditation, but we can also cultivate them by practicing the ethical precepts. Yeah, come on, George.
So if you act ethically, you can meditate well, and then but like, I guess, I don't know, I'm kind of naive, I don't know much, but like, it feels like there's other reasons to act ethically other than for your own self-gain, and I don't know, like, I'm pretty misreading this.
Yeah.
So you kind of get it wrong?
Yeah.
There's a question to ask them, I don't know what it is, but...
So the question is something about acting, why we choose to act ethically.
Yeah, it's kind of like, shouldn't you just do it anyway, rather than for the aim to be for you to get better at meditation?
Yeah, that would be ideal. Yeah, of course. If you just go around thinking I'm going to be nice to people so I can have a good meditation later, then you're probably going to limit how actually nice you're being, right? And so, I guess the way I think about it is that there are different levels or something of motivation within us. So all of us have different kind of motivations when we're doing anything. When we do anything, sometimes we'll have a genuine altruistic motivation to kind of help someone, and then there'll also be another part of us that wants to look like a good person or feel like a good person or something like that. I remember my science teacher actually at school saying to me something that, looking back, I think is really unhelpful. He said that all human beings are inherently selfish, and even when somebody does something altruistic, it's actually just us trying to look or feel better about ourselves. And I think on some level there's some truth to that, in that we all do have this kind of core delusion that we're the centre of the world, right? We all have some sort of sense of ourself as the most important thing. But we also have a sort of higher nature as well. That's what my secondary school science teacher was kind of leaving out, was that actually we do have a higher nature, and that's what you're pointing to there as well. Is that we have a higher nature that so we don't need to be thinking like of it in this model to want to act well. Yeah, go on.
There's a nice quote I know from Oscar Wilde that says, "When we're happy, we're always good, but when we're good, we're not always happy."
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I don't know. I think being a good frame of mind and meditation actually facilitates some things.
Yeah. Sangharashtra said something really similar. Actually, he said that you can't always be happy, but you can always be friendly. Yeah. Go on, Pete. Did you have something?
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, like, with the thinking like we should be ethical anyway, I think that comes from a sort of place of a bit of wisdom, and that's obviously part of the circle.
Yeah.
If we had no wisdom at all, then we wouldn't be thinking, oh, I should be ethical.
Yes, that's a really good point. Yeah. So that's, you're pointing to the spiral aspect of it there, the fact that the more wisdom that you have, the more that in a way, you'll be acting, like you were saying, you'll be acting ethically, not for your own sake, because you won't be thinking about yourself as the most important thing, but the more wisdom that you have. Good. Okay. I'm going to move on to the next thing that I'm going to talk about. So the Buddha's communicating from prajna. So that's in a way probably the one thing that I sort of am trying to say tonight is that the Buddha's communicating from prajna. In a way, the second thing that I want to say is that we don't really know what that is. Yeah, that's really important. Because the Buddha's having this experience that we're not having. It's a little bit like, I don't know if you've ever seen something that just completely blows you away, and then you try and explain it to somebody. Like I went to the Grand Canyon when I was 15. I went on a trip to America, and I saw the Grand Canyon. And I wouldn't be able to explain that to you at all. If you've seen the Grand Canyon, then you might know what I'm talking about. But if you haven't, I just wouldn't be able to sort of, it's just like vast. Do you know what I mean? It's like you could see really far. Like I wouldn't be able to explain the complete majesty, the complete kind of insignificance of how small you can feel when you're stood at the Grand Canyon and you're looking out at this kind of vista that is bigger than anything you've ever seen. So it's a bit like that on one level. The Buddha is kind of trying to communicate from a level that we, from an experience that we just haven't had. But it's much more than that even. It's much more than just like he's had a big experience, like he went to a good gig or something and he's trying to explain how good it was to people. It's much, much bigger than that because the experience itself is inherently indescribable. So I'm going to go back to this diagram again. I want to talk about what's up here. And what's up here is the Buddha mind, yeah? The Buddha's experience of his own mind, the enlightened mind. And we think about our mind and we think, okay, well actually, the more that we think about our mind, the more we sort of know that actually we have no idea what we're talking about when we talk about our mind anyway. But certainly we start from a place generally of this idea of like, okay, my mind is mine and I'm doing certain things and I'm thinking certain things and well, I guess the most important thing to say about it is that I have a mind that is perceiving a world out there in some sort of way. The Buddha wouldn't be experiencing his mind like that. In a way, you could say that the Buddha's mind doesn't work like that. It's not a subject perceiving the object of the world. It's completely beyond that distinction of like, here's the mind and here's the world. It's somehow imbued in all of reality. I'll read something actually that hopefully will kind of clarify that a bit more. Actually, I'll do that first before I write something on the board. So here Sangharaj is talking about communication, and he says, we tend to assume, perhaps unconsciously, that the Buddha speaks in much the same way that an ordinary person does, because after all he uses much the same language as everybody else around him. But behind the common mode of communication, There is something in the Buddha's speech that is not there behind our own speech. In forming the Buddha's words, standing behind them as it were, there is the enlightened consciousness, the Buddha mind, and for those who have ears to hear, the words of the Buddha express that Buddha mind. However, those words cannot be said to express the Buddha mind directly. In fact, although words are the most obvious medium of communication, they provide only one of the ways, perhaps the least direct way, in which the Buddha expresses enlightenment. So he then goes on to talk about how these different levels, these three levels of this term, the Buddha Vachana, yeah? So Vachana meaning voice, so 3 levels of the voice of the Buddha. And the first level, the most primary level, is what I'm going to kind of illustrate up here, is the level at which the Buddha's mind is, I'll say imbued into all of reality again. And he talks about in the text that lots of Eastern traditions, some Eastern traditions talk about this as the syllable Om. Yeah, so and this is almost a kind of cliche, isn't it now? The syllable Om. Whenever like a cartoon character's doing yoga or something, they'll chant Om. Actually, it means quite a different thing, a bit of a different thing in Hinduism. I won't go into that, but in Buddhism, I'll just read one more thing. It says, this is not a syllable pronounced by any human tongue. Yeah, so it's not. So when I say Om, I'm not talking about us chanting Om. It's a subtle, inner, spiritual sound which can sometimes be heard in higher states of consciousness, such as those attained in meditation. If you are attuned to it, you can hear it coming from all things, all phenomena of the universe, because the Buddha mind is, as it were, behind them all, even within them all, and shines through them, sounds through them. Is that clear? So we're talking about something which is very hard to talk about, but we're talking about the kind of nature of the Buddha's mind being, as he says, kind of behind almost kind of all experience in the universe. But the Buddha didn't just kind of go around saying to people, I don't know, meditate loads and you'll eventually hear Om and you'll be sorted. He said, he had to communicate to people. Yeah, he had to communicate. He had to sort of, in a sense, come down a level to be able to communicate to people. And so the next level down of the Buddha Vachana, the sort of voice of the Buddha, is the level of archetypal images. In a way, it's the level of metaphor, because the Buddha can't literally describe, nobody can literally describe what we're talking about. So we have to start talking in metaphor. We have to start saying, it's like this, or it's like that, or it's not like this, and it's not like that. So we start to kind of fall back on metaphor, we start to fall back on archetypal imagery. And this is why we have Buddha, imagery like we've got on the shrine, the image of the Buddha there. That's not like, a statue of the Buddha in the way that, I don't know, there's a statue of Winston Churchill in Parliament Square that looks, as far as I know, pretty much like Winston Churchill did. This is, the Buddha would have looked nothing like that. He wasn't golden, literally anyway, and actually would have probably had a big beard and long hair and all the rest of it. So this is an archetypal image that's trying to speak to something beyond our sort of our usual way of kind of literalizing everything. Yeah, we're trying to get to something that isn't just our kind of well, we just literalize so much, don't we? Like, it's so hard for us to hear something and not kind of go, yeah, but like, you know, when you say that, like, that's not actually true, is it, because of that? Rather than kind of actually listening to what's trying to be said. So important for us to listen to what's actually being meant than what's being said, especially when we're being taught the Dharma, but really at any point. So we've got archetypal imagery, like the way that we portray the Buddha, and then you've got all of these other kind of archetypal images of the Buddha, some of them with things like flaming swords and I don't know, other kind of implements that I won't go into, all with their own kind of symbolic meaning. In a way, it's the same sort of thing, going back to this kind of image of the lotuses. You know, that's trying to get into kind of a truth that is more significant than we could understand if we just said, yeah, people are at different stages of growth. Like, if we just say that, like, we wouldn't really be taking it in on the level that we need to. And I think the significant thing about the Buddha speaking is that he's not just saying things that are interesting to know. He's not just saying like ideas that, you know, will make us sound clever at a party. Although definitely when we start, well, maybe I should speak for myself. When I got into Buddhism, like, I was certainly a bit of a kind of a tendency was like going around sort of saying, did you know that craving is the root of all suffering? Like, it's much more significant than just being able to recount it. He's trying to get us to right? He's trying to get us to a place where we fully experience prajna. We don't just kind of know the stuff that he said. And that's why imagery is so important. So that's the second level down, yeah? So we've got this first level, which is kind of a second level, which is archetypal imagery. And then we've got the third level, which is conceptual thought. So that's where we start getting into, well, in a way, like frameworks, like the Threefold Path. 1 second, I'll come to you in a sec. So you've got kind of concepts, and those are coming down to our level even more. So they're, Sangha just says, they're the most easy to misunderstand, but they're also kind of, in a way, the kind of way that we, most of us will end up thinking about the Dharma most of the time. Yeah. And
I just wanted to ask before you went on.
Yeah.
You're talking about things that the Buddha says.
Yeah.
So how do you employ these archetypes? What would he say?
Well, some of the things I've already said. So the thing with the lotuses, for example, that'd be one.
Yeah, right. So it's like a story he would tell to people who are prospective followers.
Yeah,
in
yeah.
which he used one single image.
Yeah.
In order to evoke one feeling.
Yeah.
Close to.
Yeah. I mean, there's a famous story of the Buddha as well where he's going to teach somebody asks him a question, I can't remember who it is now, but he just holds up a flower, and that's all he says. And so there's things like that, but also all the way through kind of the literature, he's often talking in kind of poetry, really. He's talking in symbol and metaphor. Yeah.
Cool. Got it.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so I was a bit confused because when you Google Buddhism, when you start looking into Buddhism, they talk about an Eightfold Path.
Yeah. Yeah. How does the Eightfold Path fit with the Threefold Path question? Yeah. I won't do the full mapping, but it does map really well. So the Eightfold Path is what it's said that it was the formulation that he taught to his 5 friends originally, actually. And then the Threefold Path, all of the 8 can fit into these 3. I won't tell you how, just because there's not time right now. But it maps onto it, and that's a bit, in a way, the Threefold Path is a more simplistic way of talking about the Eightfold Path. We can do the mapping in the reception area later if you want.
Well, this is more sort of a, maybe, I don't know, slightly historical question. The Buddha's 5 friends, are they a bit like Jesus' disciples who then go out and teach, or?
Yeah, they do. Yeah. I don't know that much about Jesus' disciples, to be honest, so I wouldn't be able to do a comparative thing. But yeah, they do go off and teach, and kind of have their own followers and things like that. Yeah, great. I'm going to start to wrap us up. How am I going to do that? Oh yeah, so I wanted to talk a bit about what we do with that, because in a way it's kind of, I don't know, it's one thing to sort of say, I don't know, the Buddha's talking from this experience that is really, really hard for us to understand and conceptualize, and it's another thing for us to, I don't know, have anything to do on the basis of that. So, I don't know. Maybe it's obvious. Actually, what do you think? Like, do you feel like there's something that this is kind of telling us to do? What I've been saying so far. Okay, I'll spell it out. So going back to the Threefold Path. So we have to kind of know, we have to know that we're not starting from up there. That's one thing, right? So we have to know that we're not starting from the experience of kind of seeing through reality, as it were, right? We have to sort of recognize that we're seeing we're experiencing the world from the level of, in a way, delusion, in a way like the experience of thinking that we're fixed and we're separate, and that we're in some way kind of the center of things. That's how we experience the world, right? Like we're at the center of things. So that's a sort of flawed perspective. It's not a kind of absolute perspective in the way that an enlightened mind would be, where it sort of understands kind of reality at its core, in its core sort of essence. And because we're not up there, we're somewhere there. We're somewhere back there. Yeah, we're somewhere in this path, and so we need to practice that path. Basically, we need to start kind of going round, understanding the kind of the link, the causal link, the conditional link between sila and samadhi and prajna, so that we can kind of start moving round those and moving back round as well, moving back round from prajna, whatever experience of prajna, whatever limited experience of wisdom, of seeing how things really are, we do get to in practicing the Dharma. We have to then know that's kind of incomplete, and go back round to sila, go back round to ethics, and keep going back round, practicing those three things at a kind of higher and higher path. Yeah, because to the extent that we are practicing, the Dharma won't just be an idea. Yeah, to the extent that we're really, really practicing, it won't just be something that, you know, we can go around telling people at parties about. It will actually be the experience that we're living from. To the extent that the Buddha was enlightened, so he was living completely from an enlightened experience. So we want to try and move towards that. Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to ask a quick question.
Yeah.
So obviously meditation in itself is a practice, so we can easily go away home and meditate. But how do you practice wisdom and ethics? Is that something, I know you said it doesn't start with one and it's all a cycle, but just as like a key takeaway, aside from meditation, like how else can we develop and, you know, just be better?
Yeah, it's a big question, or in a way it's like two really big questions. But the briefest answers I can think of, so with ethics is to practice the precepts. And so if you want to learn more about the precepts, I'd really recommend the book Not About Being Good by Subhadramati. That's in the bookshop. Not About Being Good. And then with wisdom, wisdom's a bit like salt in Buddhism. If you add too much of it, then it will start to taste a bit funny. But the best way to start to kind of understand what Buddhism's saying about wisdom more is to read the Dharma and reflect on it in your experience as well. So that it's not just doesn't just become a sort of exercise where you can list off all of the Buddhist lists, of which there are many, but you're actually reflecting on, like, is this actually true in my experience? So reading and reflecting.
Amazing.
Cool. Great. Okay, good. I wanted to finish with a mantra, because in a way, I just thought, talking about the word of the Buddha, and of course, whatever I say is going to be completely, it's just going to completely pale to the actual word of the Buddha. In a way, we've got to end this evening with the actual kind of word of the Buddha, with the actual kind of Buddha's name, and trying to get as close to the sort of sound of enlightenment as we can. We'll do the Shakyamuni Mantra, which has the syllable Om in it, and it also has the Buddha's name in it. Actually, Pranyamanis, would you mind leading it? So we'll just settle down for a moment. And we'll do the mantra for a few minutes, and then we'll let it die off, fade away. When Pranyamanis is ready, he'll start us in the Shakyamuni Mantra. great to see you all, and see you again next week.
Thank you.